Good morning. Today I'm showing off the life stacking turret mage. Now this is a build that can do any content in the game. It can AFK the forge, and it will never be at risk of dying to any of the bosses or harder content, even when scaled up to the highest possible level. Alright, so now I'm going to show you what this looks like in a Wrath 10 plus 100 battlefield. Now we're using Arcane Missile for the clear, because casting the clones takes a while. Like, it takes a few seconds to get all 4 clones up. So when I'm clearing stuff like this, I usually just use my Arcane Missiles. I will put down a few clones just to show them, but they're mostly for the forge. That's where the clones really shine. You basically get 4 permanent laser turrets that will clear the forge for you while you sip your coffee. And you can help them out if you want with your Arcane Missiles. This build also has a lot of flexibility when it comes to spells, or abilities, which ones you want to use. I originally wanted to do Rift Nova clones, but ultimately I decided that the Rift Nova clones were too slow at clearing. Even in the forge, they took a little bit too long to kill stuff. They could one-shot pretty much anything, but the problem is they don't... I couldn't get their speeds high enough to really do the clearing properly. So I decided to go looking for other options, and in doing so, I stumbled across this option. Alright, let's take a look at the gear now. So, since we're using the Primordial Staff of the Recurring Nightmare, we are basically only stacking life on the gear, and that is our primary stacking stat. And this weapon scales primary and secondary skill damage 361%. So that's the main source of our damage, as well as a lot of our defense, because it also grants armor and elemental resistance based on my max life. So let's look at our actual gear pieces here. We have this helmet with a massive max life multiplier. That's a pretty important legendary effect, as well as we've grafted on pure stat max life rolls, both percentage and flat. Then we have this amulet. The legendary effect for this one, the Amulet of Impartiality, is it's important for the ancestral tree. I'll show you that later. Now, the classic Vestment of the Wraith gives a lot of free evasion based on missing life. That's why we're reserving our life as well. Immense Vitality, that's how we're reserving life for the most part. Arcane Lord, this lets us get another clone. And as you can see, there's max life on all of these things, as well as a few other stats. We'll talk more about the other stats later. Now, the ring effect, defense stat on both rings is increased by 30%. That's extremely strong, with the defense stat being a massive max life roll. And for the boots, we have some movement speed and some max life. I haven't found another magic stat max life to graft onto this, so we still have some grafts. Bear in mind, in general, my gear is not optimal. I did waste a few grafts because I had to make some changes when I went from Rift Nova to laser turrets. This ring gives +1 rank on every ancestral gift. It's not crucial to the build, it's just a nice to have. It gives us a bit of extra damage and stuff. The legendary glove effect is not at all important. There's not that much that you can get in this slot that's really going to matter for this build. Consider it a flexible slot. You can graft something else onto it, or Do whatever you like. The Midas Collectors, I use this in every single build. I literally don't even want to play the game without this legendary effect. It is that strong, or that convenient. I just love it. The Nether Ethereal Cloning Pads will make sure that our Arcane Missiles will always be cast with many projectiles. But in order to enable these, you actually need to make sure that you don't have any additional projectiles from any other source. I don't think you can even use the remnants on the Arcane Missile skill tree. So bear that in mind. I would also consider the slot to be kind of flexible, since you can pretty much choose which skills you want to use with this build. The core of the build is just the life stacking, so using this staff and life stacking, you can use pretty much any of the primary and secondary skills for the mage. Now for the Ultimatum, I'm doing critical strike damage. I don't get the stat on gear, and I'm also using the rune to improve the Ultimatum. And we activate it through kills, and we lower the constraint to get it more consistently. I'm going to go over the stats that are not max life and not legendary effects now. So we are capping fire resistance, shadow resistance, tenacity, and armor penetration. Those are just always really nice to have on most builds, in my opinion, but they are mostly a luxury. We are also capping rebound chance at 100%, because we get Pierce and Fork for free on our Arcane Missiles through a passive using that. We are stacking Totem Increased Effects for the extra damage for our clones. They actually count as totems. And then on top of that we have some crit chance, which also boosts our damage, and some movement speed to run faster. And we have a little bit of life on hit, mana on hit. I think we have one life regen somewhere as well. I'll show you later why these are not terribly important, but there are a lot of slots on this gear that I simply couldn't find anything good to put on there. So those are basically just placeholders. You could probably graft something stronger onto those slots. Now, for the attributes, we are getting 45 Savagery, obviously, because it gives raw damage based on missing life. We also just dump a bunch of points in Savagery, but the 45 is the key thing here. We get 10 Fury just for the crit chance, and we actually get 25 Determination, because there's some good maximum life ones in there. We don't really care about anything else in the Determination tree. And I decided to dump the rest of my points into Bravery. I really enjoy the greed stacks when I'm clearing. It's not going to help me in Forge, but I basically get 15% crit chance uptime permanently. With permanent uptime, jeez. Alright, our Ancestral Legacy tree looks like this. We're grabbing elemental boosts, which, because of our legendary effects, turn into raw damage boosts instead. And they also get an extra point due to another legendary effect. This is just for pathing, it's pretty pointless. This is just for some extra raw damage. And the Auramancer at 1 out of 10 is pretty important, because we're using Immense Vitality and Bloodright to reserve a bunch of life, to get it to count as missing life for a couple of things. Mainly the Vestments of the Wraith and the Savagery 45, those are the big ones. Now, this is also just for pathing. I'm not really taking advantage of Bastion at all in this. And the Dark Ritual is kind of important, actually, because it adds a life cost to our spells, and it boosts our damage. Adding the life cost to the spells, I will get into that later when I talk about the skills. Alright, let's talk about the skills briefly. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I will leave a link to the planner in the description, and I'll talk about the most important aspects of the skills here. Now, Pain Catalyzer is why Dark Ritual is so important. Because whenever I lose life, I restore mana. And casting with a life cost also counts for this. So this basically gives us infinite mana sustain. The clones will also consume our mana, but they'll also consume our life. So this will just restore our mana constantly whenever they cast. It'll never drop. This one doesn't matter much. This one doesn't matter. Cooldown reduction on the clones is nice. This armor is nice, but very low. These are important, though. One additional arcane clone. And with our legendary effect, we get a fourth as well. This is how we get 4 turrets. I'm not using this at all. For the arcane missile, I need to talk about Evolve and Overcome. This is why we only stack Rebound, because it gives Pierce and Fork for free. Another thing you need to be aware of with adding projectiles through that shoulder legendary that we use, you need to avoid casting Remnants. Because if you do, you no longer get the extra projectiles. So we turn this off, and we get all 8 extra projectiles. For the Ray of Obliteration, the important part is turning it into turrets, increasing the range, and the rotation is kind of personal preference. You could increase their damage if you're lacking single target damage, but I feel like the rotation just looks really fun and feels nice for clear compared to not having it. You can use this to trigger Inner Fire as well. It actually triggers Inner Fires on you when the clones cast the Ray. However, in this build, we can't really scale Inner Fire that well because our weapon doesn't affect it. So I'm not really doing that, but that's another build idea, I guess. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you can literally use any skill for this. Any of these skills will work fine with this build. It's not scaling Inner Fire, and it's not scaling elemental damage, so that puts a limit on what you can do with the ancestral tree and stuff, but you have a lot of options. So, how strong is the build actually? Well, let me demonstrate it by bullying an old man with 2 hats. I'm gonna put down my clones, and they're gonna do some damage, and then I'm just gonna hold my arcane missile button and not move at all. And Adam is quickly getting obliterated. There he goes. I can also just stand in everything. There's nothing in this fight that can hurt me at all. Now, let's move on to the Slormancer. We took no damage in that fight. I'll put down my totems and engage the fight, and then just stand here and shoot at him, and then take the breaches. Stand here and shoot at him. Breaches. It's kind of hard to hit the breaches with my current movement speed, actually. I'm running past them. And his ability to reduce our life to 1 doesn't matter, because we instantly leech it back up. And we also just almost never get hit through evasion. And when we do get hit, we don't get hit for a lot, because we have armor and elemental resistance as well. And a big life pool. In this fight, the highest damage taken was 291. Nice. Alright, that's going to do it for the guide section of this video. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions or thoughts on the build, feel free to leave them as a comment on the video. Also, do let me know if there's any builds that you're super excited about in the Slormancer. There are a ton of possible builds, and really not enough time in the day to really try out all the ones I want to try, unfortunately. So I want to hear from you guys. What have you been experimenting with in Slormancer, and what is your favorite build? Alright, before I go, I'd like to remind you guys that there will be a link to the build planner in the description of the video. And I'd like to thank you guys for watching this far. And if you want to keep watching for a little bit longer, I'll do the last few waves of a Forge run with a little bit of extra life on the monsters. 210% apparently, permanently. I didn't get the gold curse, but I'm pretty confident that this build would be able to do the gold curse as well.